Hello, I'm Eric Jacobson, the Executive Director of the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities. Today, I want to talk to you about what the Council has achieved during federal fiscal year 2018. Let me give you a brief background on the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities before I get into the accomplishments. The Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities is established through the Developmental Disabilities Bill of Rights and Assistance Act. That's United States legislation that creates a Developmental Disabilities Council in every state and territory in the nation. Developmental Disabilities Bill of Rights and Assistance Act talks about the role of councils on developmental disabilities. As we see it in Georgia, the role of developmental disability councils are to create systemic change through advocacy and capacity building activities that result in people with developmental disabilities and their families being more independent, or as I would like to say, interdependent, because we're all dependent on others, economically self-sufficient, included and integrated in their communities, and self-determined in their lives. In Georgia, we've interpreted this to mean the following. We all want to belong to a community. We all want to be full participants in that community, whether we have disabilities or not. But in order to do so, we all need certain things. We need access to real careers and real jobs. We need access to real learning experiences, real homes, real influence over our lives, and for people with developmental disabilities, that also means real support. I think the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities has been very busy this year and has really accomplished a lot. I think you'll see that in what I talk about in just a minute. The way we look at our 5-year state plan is based on certain goals. Those goals are around making sure that people with disabilities, adults and youngsters, family members and others are included in the community at every level. That means in education, we're looking at how kids with disabilities are included in classrooms and included in the livelihood of school systems. In employment, it means people with disabilities working alongside people without disabilities in all kinds of jobs based on their talents and skills. When we look at the publicly funded system of services for people with developmental disabilities, what does that mean in their lives, and how well are the supports being provided? The Council has been intimately involved in the public policy process in the state of Georgia and on the federal level, and we believe this is an instrument for making sure that people with disabilities get what they need on a regular basis. We believe that people with disabilities need access to information so they can make their best decisions themselves. And finally, one of the things that the Council has been most proud of is in its work in developing communities around the state that bring people with and without disabilities together on a regular basis. In the area of education, we've had primarily 2 programs operating during the past year. One of them I've spoken to you about before, and that's inclusive post-secondary education. This is an opportunity for students with disabilities to attend regular universities like other students in order to get an education, in order to pursue a career path. There are currently 9 schools across the state that offer inclusive post-secondary education for students. Each of those programs is different based on the makeup of that university and how they operate. But universities such as Kennesaw State University, Georgia Tech, University of Georgia, Georgia Southern University, East Georgia State College, Columbus State University, and West Georgia College are all offering students an opportunity to become part of that campus and part of the life on that campus at the same time. The second education program that we've been working on, and this is a new one for us, are 2 projects that we're currently working on that are looking at the issue of school-to-prison pipeline. During the Council's development of its 5-year plan, it identified the issue of primarily African American males being overly identified for special education, and often those children being put into separate schools, not really receiving an education, and then ending up in the prison pipeline. So we have 2 projects that are looking at these issues. One is in Gwinnett County, and the other is in Athens. Both of them using different methods to educate people and to think about what the solutions are to those problems. Employment is one of the most important skills and opportunities that an individual can have, whether you have disabilities or not. We know that through employment, people can then own a home or rent a home. They can then buy goods and services. So without employment, we see people more and more reliant on government as opposed to being tax-paying productive citizens. The Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities has rated employment as one of its top priorities. And with that in mind, we've been involved in 3 projects. The first is a project we've been involved with for over 10 years now, and that is Project Search. In 18 locations across the state, students with disabilities in high school get the opportunity to spend a year in either a hospital, on a college campus, learning the various jobs that are available within those entities. They rotate, so they learn different pieces of it. And then finally, when the year is over, working with vocational rehabilitation, the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, and the school system, those students then have the opportunity to be hired by the places where they were working. In fact, in some of those locations, that hiring rate is 100%. We believe that Project Search is a great place for students to get their first feel of what it means to be on the job, and then to learn and grow those skills so they have the opportunity for real jobs afterwards. The second project that we began this year was a technical assistance project through the Institute on Human Development and Disability, in which we want to work with providers who are interested in moving from segregated workshop kinds of activities into supported employment and real jobs. The Technical Assistance Center will work with those entities, develop a community of practice, and also host a website to help disseminate information. We believe this is an opportunity to change the model that exists currently in Georgia and move it to a place where everybody can go to work if that's what they want to. Council on Developmental Disabilities worked with Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency and other advocates to pass Employment First legislation. This legislation says that work should be the first option for people with disabilities. We believe this is true. We believe that the policies and the budgets need to be changed in Georgia to support people going to work, as opposed to sitting at home or sitting in facilities where they're really not learning or doing anything positive. We believe that Employment First legislation can tie together all the various pieces of what's happening in Georgia as a way to move forward and make sure that all of those individuals with disabilities, regardless of disability, can go to work if that's what their goal is. Strengthening the publicly funded system, the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities worked on 3 separate projects. The first is we have provided a grant to the Georgia Advocacy Office, and they are currently working on educating people around the state. They held a symposium in November. They've held trainings around the state to talk about the idea of supported decision making. So often when a student reaches 18, school systems recommend to their parents that guardianship be taken. That means that an individual really loses their self-identity. They're unable often to get married, to vote, to hold a job, to do all those things that many of us take for granted on a day-to-day basis. All because the court systems haven't been involved and have taken away citizenship from that individual. We believe that supported decision-making is an alternative to guardianship. We believe it's a way to bring people together around an individual to help that individual make the best decisions for themselves. The Georgia Advocacy Office will continue providing training and information with the hope that we can pass legislation that will make supported decision-making a legal, viable option for individuals and families. The second project that we worked on with the Georgians for a Healthy Future was to educate people around the state about what's happening in Medicaid. We know that in the November 2018 election, one of the most controversial and talked about topics was the expansion of Medicaid as a way to make sure that every Georgian has access to health care. Working with Georgians for a Healthy Future, we were able to educate citizens around the state about the role of Medicaid, about what Medicaid really does and does not do, about how Medicaid helps people with disabilities get the supports they need in order to go to work, in order to have their own home, in order to be contributing members of their community. We believe that continuing to push the idea that Medicaid is a viable part of the service system piece and the funding of services, we will continue to work with the Georgians for a Healthy Future to educate people about the necessities of Medicaid. Finally, we worked with Sangha Unity Network in order to think about self-advocacy in a totally different way. The Sangha or Sun network went across the state talking with individuals with developmental disabilities about the kind of network they want in order to grow leadership skills, in order to grow advocacy skills, and in order to take roles in leadership in organizations, in networks, in entities that support people with disabilities. We believe this is the best way for things to improve, is for people with developmental disabilities to have their own voice, and Sun will help us do that. Around the issue of public policy, the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities continues to support efforts during the legislative session to improve policy and budgets for people with developmental disabilities. We did this by supporting Unlock the Waiting List and their efforts to bring people together in order to educate them about the issues that are important that were taking place during the legislative session. We did that by supporting 5 advocacy days that allowed people with disabilities to come to the Capitol to meet with their legislators to talk about issues like home and community-based services, waiting lists for home and community-based services, inclusive post-secondary education, and employment. We believe this is the best way for legislators to understand the issues of their constituents, to actually get that chance to meet with them on a day-to-day basis and talk with them about the issues that are important to them. The other way that we've helped educate legislators is through our 3rd annual Take Your Legislator to Work Day. This is an opportunity for legislators to go with their constituents to work, to see what happens when people go to work, to see what they do on that daily basis when they're at their jobs, to talk with the folks that they work with, to really understand why employment is such an important part of not only individuals without disabilities' lives, but people with disabilities as well. People want to go to work, and the more we understand that, the more we'll put our resources and our policies behind that. This is the issue of public information. We believe soundly that one of the main roles that the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities plays is getting information out to people so that they can make decisions, they can share that information with others, and move their lives in a meaningful way. We do that through Making a Difference magazine, which has had several changes during the past year, including going digital as opposed to being in paper format. We did this for a couple of reasons. One is obvious. We wanted to save trees, right? We wanted to make sure that, like everybody else, we're doing our part to make sure that trees aren't cut down. And at the same time, being able to expand our readership by putting that magazine online, sending it out through emails, and making it more accessible to more people. It allowed us also to embed things like video into the magazine as opposed to just still pictures and writing. We also have our website and other social media and pieces that allows us to get information out as soon as possible to allow you to work with your legislators and others around different issues. We also started an online newsletter that comes out in between the magazine to update you on what is happening as well. And finally, around public information, we collected the stories of 63 Georgians with disabilities around the state so that we could share them with their legislators and with the public and with others so that they know your story. The most effective way to change policy and practice is for somebody to know somebody else. If you want to change the stigma, you get people to meet other people. This is what the Storytelling Project allows us to do. It allows us to go out, interview somebody, understand their story, and then share that story with people throughout the state. We think this is the next way for us to see policy change in the state of Georgia. Finally, our central project is Real Communities. These are 6 communities around the state that are working to bring people with and without disabilities together around issues around housing, around how do we make sure that students are able to work with other students, around getting people to know people with disabilities, examining issues that are important to that community, and then making the change necessary to solve those problems. We think Real Communities is an excellent way for us all to think about what's next in our society. How do we engage people, all people, in the conversation that makes our world a better place to live? It makes our state a better place to live. It makes our communities a better place to live. Those are the things that the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities worked on during this last year. I think you'll agree with me that we were quite busy, that we really had a number of things going on that allowed us to engage with you, it allowed us to engage with legislators, it allowed us to engage with all those stakeholders of the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities in order for us to achieve our mission of making sure that all Georgians live in a better place.